listening to the Life Edit Project podcast, where busy, ambitious high achievers get the tools they need to fight overwhelm and overthinking with balance, self-mastery, and a positive mindset. I'm your host, Elizabeth Burrows. I'm serving up bite-sized truth bombs in a judgment-free zone based on my perspective as a life coach, wife, mom, and recovering overachiever. We keep it real over here, which usually means some combination of insightful, entertaining, and a hot mess express. So, if you're looking for perfection, look elsewhere. But if you're still with me, let's dig into this week's episode. Good day, good people. Welcome back to the Life Edit Project podcast. Today we're kicking off our Self-Care Essentials mini-series, which is a new thing for us over here. As you know, this is a weekly podcast, and so I usually just show up and talk to y'all about whatever it is I think y'all need to hear. But one of the things I know so many of you struggle with is self-care. And self-care is a very layered topic. And there's so much to talk about, so much to discuss. And I thought the best way to tackle self-care was actually through a series of conversations. So I'm excited to dive in. But first, I want to send a special shout out to my listener bae of the week. It's been a few weeks since we've had a review to share, and I'm excited to share this one. So, you know, I rock with all of you who listen to the podcast regularly, but my listener baes are the ones that take the time to leave a 5-star rating and review for the show over on Apple Podcasts. So today's review was left by the user named Chosen63. And here's what she said. OMG, I'm listening to your latest podcast with your hubby and I love it. It is really entertaining and informative as well. I will forward it to some couples I know. I wish when I was a younger lady, someone would sit with me and my ex to share such important insights. Unfortunately, I had to divorce him years ago after being married for 22 years. I totally agree. If a couple experiences red flags while in a relationship, that marriage will not fix it. This was one of my mistakes. Love, love, love this episode. God bless you. Thank you, Chosen63, for this thoughtful review and for the 5-star rating. I'm glad you found the episode so insightful and that you think it's helpful enough to share with some other people that you know. Sharing is caring, and I appreciate all of the ways that all of you lovely listeners help this podcast reach more people. And of course, reviews are the best way to help us get in front of new listeners. If you want to be my listener bae of the week in a future episode, just leave a 5-star rating along with a review on Apple Podcasts. And if you don't know how to do that, there are step-by-step instructions on my website at lifeeditproject.com/podcasts. And of course, that link is in the show notes for you. In other news, I'm excited to share that I was featured on another podcast recently, the You World Order Showcase. So the host, Jill Hart, she interviewed me and asked me lots of questions, and I got a chance to share more of my personal story, like about how I got into coaching, but I also got a chance to talk about what kind of person would be my ideal client to work with and the way that I work with clients to help them get results in their lives. It was a really fun conversation, and I'm so used to, doing this podcast that it was a fun and different experience to be on a podcast, but not in the driver's seat. So if you want to check out that show, and I highly suggest that you do, I'll put the link in the show notes so that you can check that out as well. So, okay, I think that's all of the housekeeping for today, and that means it's time to talk about some self-care essentials. Let's dig in, shall we? So hopefully you've already had a chance to listen to last week's episode 12, called What You've Been Getting Wrong About Self-Care. It's not exactly required listening for today's conversation, but I did offer you the Coach Elizabeth definition of self-care in that episode, and I discussed the 3 major mistakes that I see most people make when it comes to self-care. So that information is like a helpful backdrop for what we're going to discuss today. So be sure to put episode 12 on your playlist, whether you need to refresh your memory and just listen to it again, or if you need to listen to it for the first time. Regardless, Today, I'm starting a 4-part mini-series that I'm calling Self-Care Essentials. And in each episode in this mini-series, I'll be tackling a different aspect of self-care that would benefit high achievers and perfectionists if they gave these aspects some special attention. And today, for part 1, I'm tackling one of my favorite conversations, one of my favorite topics ever, and that is boundaries. So I'm starting with boundaries because being able to effectively set and stick to healthy boundaries is a foundational skill for almost any other type of self-care that you can think of. Boundaries are literally so important that if you don't know how and when to create them, and if you don't understand how your boundaries affect you and the people around you, self-care will always feel like a riddle that you can't solve. So, what is a boundary anyways, right? We use this word a lot, but do we really know what it means? Very simply put, a boundary is a limit that you adopt out of self-preservation. Very, very simple. Boundaries can take many different forms. They can be absolute and unchanging, or they can be relative and evolving depending on, how you're feeling or what kind of situation you're in. And the fact is, boundaries don't look like just one thing. And they can't because, like all self-care, boundaries are extremely personal and they will vary from person to person. Getting ready for this episode, I did some extra research on boundaries, and one of the things that kept coming up was this idea that setting a boundary means saying no to other people. And I found it fascinating because, yes, it's true that saying no can be a type of boundary, but that's just what it is. It is a specific type of boundary that you would set and use in a specific type of scenario. Not all boundaries look like saying no. There are lots of situations where the binary yes-no limit just doesn't make sense and it's not practical. And if you've been under that same impression, and if you've been assuming that setting a boundary means saying no, then I want to offer you with this episode a different perspective so that you can approach boundaries differently for yourself. So the main thing I want to offer you is that your boundaries are not about stopping people from doing things that you don't like. Your boundaries are also not about punishing people for acting contrary to how you want them to behave. And your boundaries are about way more than not being a people pleaser. Your boundaries are an investment in your future well-being. They are limits that you set to keep yourself out of unhealthy, dangerous, or damaging situations to the extent that you're able to control your environment. That means that boundaries at their core are a form of self-care. And here are 3 ways that they're essential to your overall self-care practice. So the first way boundaries are essential to self-care is that healthy boundaries will require you to proactively think about and prioritize your own needs. If you're going to set a limit, you have to first know where to draw the line. And there's a certain amount of reflection and introspection that you have to do to become familiar with what it is that you need and to know what it is that threatens your sense of safety or well-being. And then, after you've identified where the line should be, it takes a whole nother level of self-esteem and self-worth to actually enforce that limit. And those are 2 different skill sets, knowing yourself and valuing yourself. But because they're skills, it does mean that even if you're not very good at them now, with practice and repetition, you can get better. So whenever you practice setting a boundary, communicating a boundary, or enforcing a boundary, you are practicing self-care. And by doing so, you're either creating or reinforcing an environment that serves your future well-being. Now, I recognize that the whole idea of thinking about and prioritizing yourself is one of the reasons why so many people feel like boundaries are selfish. But there's a difference between being self-oriented and being selfish. Setting boundaries requires you to be self-oriented, but selfishness doesn't ever have to be part of the equation. What's the difference, you're saying? Well, when you're self-oriented, you're claiming a perspective that is uniquely yours. Everyone has a unique perspective because everyone is experiencing a unique life. It's not wrong or immoral to acknowledge your unique perspective, and claiming your unique perspective as the default way that you will experience life does not make you selfish. Trying to claim what belongs to others for yourself is what selfish means. Claiming what's yours for you is not. So no more thinking about boundaries as being selfish. Now, another way boundaries are essential to self-care is that healthy boundaries are the bedrock of healthy relationships. So while you cannot control what other people do and how they show up or treat you, the way you show up in any relationship you're in will influence the overall dynamic of that relationship. When you maintain healthy boundaries in relationships, it's easier to build trust, connection, and intimacy because the relationship is a safe place for that type of authenticity. And boundaries are going to play a role in all of your relationships, from professional associations to platonic friendships, romantic partnerships and entanglements, and yes, in family relationships too. It's so funny. Whenever I talk about boundaries, I always get questions about whether it's appropriate to set boundaries with family members. And the answer is always yes, of course, if you want a healthy relationship with your family member. Because healthy boundaries are the foundation of healthy relationships, and family is no exception. But besides all those relationships, most importantly, boundaries play a key role in your relationship with yourself. And your relationship with yourself becomes the barometer for every other relationship you have. That makes boundaries essential to your self-care. Now, the inverse of this is also true. Unhealthy boundaries, or a lack of boundaries altogether, become a breeding ground for unhealthy relationships. So if there's some kind of unhealthy dynamic in a relationship that you're in, you can probably trace it back to some type of unaddressed boundary violation. Now, I want to be really clear right here. If you have been or are currently in an unhealthy or even an unsafe relationship, this is not me blaming you as the victim. I'm not saying that if someone treats you badly in a relationship that it is your fault. They are accountable for themselves and their own actions, just like you are accountable for yourself and your actions. I'm simply acknowledging that setting and sticking to boundaries will impact the overall sustained dynamic of any relationship you're in. And it will impact how you respond to things that make you feel unsafe, unsupported, or unwelcome. Now, the third way boundaries are essential to self-care is that they're your domain and yours only. No one else can set your boundaries for you or manage them for you. Remember, last week I defined self-care as something that you do or facilitate for yourself in service of your future self. Boundaries can only ever be self-care because you are the only one that's qualified to draw the line and set the limit. Ain't nobody else thinking about you as much as you're thinking about you, because everybody else is thinking about themselves. And that's not a bad thing, right? But it does mean that when other people are making moves that cross your path, they might step on your toes, or they might even run you over because they're just not checking for you. They're just trying to get to where they're going. And I hear you. You're over there saying to yourself, but there are lots of people in my life that love me and care about me, and to them, my needs and feelings are important. Yes, that's got to be true. Of course, that's true. But no one, not even someone who loves and respects and cares for you, can fully understand or accommodate your needs because they lack your unique perspective. Right? So going back to the very first way that boundaries are essential to your self-care, right? Like, you have to claim your own perspective. I'm reminded of this one time that I had to set a boundary with a coworker. So, story time. So this was a long time ago, like more than 20 years ago. And I was working my first real job. And I was still new to navigating workplace dynamics, and I was still learning to think of myself as an adult and not just a teenager, right? Because I was probably about 18 years old. So I had been working this job for a little while, a couple of weeks or maybe a month or so, and a new young lady started. And she was pretty friendly, and we started chatting it up that morning. And the way our office was set up, though, was that we didn't have assigned seats. We had like different areas of the office that you used for different tasks. And so where you kind of set yourself up was based on what task you were working on. So it was pretty common for us to talk to each other from across the room. And so at this morning, I wasn't doing what she was doing, so we weren't working right next to each other. But I could hear her talking to someone named Lisa. And I was really super confused because there was nobody that worked in our office named Lisa. So imagine my surprise when I realized eventually that she was talking to me. She had been calling me Lisa all morning, and I had just been ignoring the poor girl because that wasn't my name, so I wasn't responding. So when I finally realized what was happening, I just assumed she made an honest mistake. And so I reminded her that my name was Elizabeth. And then she replied, "Oh yeah, I know." And then I was really confused because, again, Lisa is not my name. But she went on to explain that she knew someone else whose name was Elizabeth, and she referred to that person as Lisa. And so she just decided to call me Lisa as well. Now, what she didn't know was that at that time, I had a huge hang up with nicknames. So I grew up with everyone I knew calling me Beth, right? My name is Elizabeth. It was shortened to Beth. And it wasn't until I was about 12 years old that one day I looked up and realized I hate that nickname. And so I told everyone to call me Elizabeth instead of Beth. And lots of people actually resisted that change, which of course infuriated me because I was like, it's my name, right? Call me Elizabeth. And it took me something like 2 years of arguing with people and constantly correcting people, and in some cases just flat out ignoring people who wouldn't call me by my name, before I could finally get everyone on board with not using this nickname that I detested. So when my poor little unassuming coworker decided to call me by a nickname that she chose for me, she had unknowingly violated a boundary that I had around nicknames. And there was no reason, absolutely no reason why my coworker would know that a nickname would be such a hot button for me. She wasn't trying to be malicious. She was being what she thought was friendly, right? But she was operating from her own perspective. It was up to me to set and enforce my boundary with my name because I couldn't count on her to see it from my perspective because she did not have my experience. So at the end of the day, I told her that, Lisa wasn't my name and I wouldn't respond to that and that she should call me Elizabeth. And she was a bit bewildered by my response, but ultimately she honored my boundary and used my full name. Or, you know what, maybe she didn't. And I just ignored her for the rest of the day. I honestly don't remember because this was over 20 years ago. The only thing I actually remember is that after that first day, she never came back. So I never saw her again. Wherever she is, I hope she's doing well. I do wish her the best. But I also hope she's not insisting on calling people by names that they don't answer to. Okay, I hope y'all enjoyed that little peek into my life. So those are the 3 ways that boundaries are essential to your self-care. They require you to prioritize your own needs. They form the foundation of all of your relationships. And it's a type of self-care that you can never outsource. When you set and stick to healthy boundaries, that is, when you get into the habit of setting limits that protect your sense of well-being, you're taking responsibility for ensuring your safety and wellness in a way that nobody else can do. It's one of the most loving and empowering things you can do for yourself. So set those boundaries. Now, if you need help setting boundaries in a specific relationship or in the context of maybe a specific situation, I can help you. I teach all of my one-on-one coaching clients a simple 4-step process that they can use to create healthy boundaries in any area of their life. And real talk, no matter why my clients decide to work with me, we always end up working on boundaries because boundaries are essential, as we've discussed today. I'd love to teach you that same 4-step process. To get started, book a free sales call with me so we can chat about how my coaching can help you use healthy boundaries to create balance in all of your relationships and anywhere in your life. The scheduling link to book that call is in the show notes, and I'm ready to get started whenever you are. Thanks for listening today, y'all. Be sure to subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts so that you can get the next episode auto-magically. I will be back in your ears next week with part 2 of our Self-Care Essentials series. Until then, go set some healthy boundaries and be the first one to honor them. All right? Peace. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Life Edit Project podcast. I'd love to hear what your favorite moment or key takeaway was from this conversation. You can send me a message on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter to let me know. My handle is @LifeEditProject, all one word, in all the places. My social media is linked up in the show notes to make it easy for you. Holla at your girl. I'll be back next week with another episode. In the meantime, don't just stay busy with the life you have, get busy creating the life you want.